It's Sunday, December 11, 2022. Welcome to the 43rd episode of The Weekend Show, where we take a deep dive into the news of the week. Please also subscribe to my 5-Minute News daily briefing podcast on iTunes or wherever you get yours. Joining us today is attorney, former federal prosecutor, and former Republican Party official that now tracks and reports on the right wing. Ron Filipkowski, welcome to The Weekend Show.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
So you're the second Republican that's flipped that has joined me on this show before. I had former Congressman Joe Walsh on a few weeks ago,
right.
And he still thinks of himself as a Tea Party guy. Just tell me, before we get into the weeds of this week's news, what kind of caused you to flip, and how do you see yourself politically right now?
Well, I always opposed Donald Trump. I mean, I kind of knew who he was for a long time. So in 2016, I couldn't bring myself to vote for him. So I voted none of the above. It was my intention to remain a Republican, and I just thought, okay, he'll have his one term and then he'll be gone. And what really disheartened me, though, was not the fact that Donald Trump became president, but it was what happened after, that with the party, that the party just decided to embrace him and embrace Trumpism. And that's really distressed me about the long-term prospects of the party, and in terms of whether it would ever get better. And so I came to the conclusion in 2020, early on in 2020, that it was irretrievably broken. And so I decided to openly campaign for Joe Biden and join his team, do some commercials, do some ads as a Republican supporting Joe Biden. My intention, though, was after the election to become an independent. But January 6th changed that. I was so upset about January 6th, and I was covering it, that the following morning on January 7th, I just decided I can't sit on the fence. I can't try and be an independent like Kyrsten Sinema just did. I've got to take a stand and take a side. And I just decided the following morning to register as a Democrat. So it's not that I agree with everything that the progressives believe in. We don't agree on everything, of course, but I think we agree on more of the big things. And I just think that the Republican Party is unrecognizable to me today from what it was before Trump.
We'll talk about Kyrsten Sinema in just a moment, because it's pretty fresh, this news that she is switching from Democrats to become an independent. You could have predicted that, I guess, but I missed it, and maybe Chuck Schumer missed it too. But I just want to go back a little bit. Mm-hmm. Before Trumpism, What was it about conservatism and the Republican Party that attracted you?
It's a good question. I grew up in a poor family. I'm a single mom. My mom cleaned houses, so I had no money for college. So I joined the Marines, and to get the GI Bill to get money for college. And while I was in Okinawa, Japan, actually on a base, an island in the middle of the Pacific, I holed myself up into the base library because I've never was somebody that liked to play cards and hang out in bars. And so I just holed myself up there for about 6 months and just started reading. And I had no fixed political philosophy at that time, but I just started reading, from far left stuff to far right stuff, National Review and The Nation, history books. And in fact, it was I became infatuated with Winston Churchill at that time, obsessed with Winston Churchill, read all his biographies. So eventually I just sort of gravitated more towards the right, because what appealed to me at that time was the fact that it was a rugged individualism, survival of the fittest. I've always felt like if I was on a level playing field with somebody, I could do well. And so that's all I wanted, was a level playing field to compete. I didn't want help from the government. And I just felt like that appealed to me. Obviously, being a young Marine makes you more conservative as well, and always. Well,
I was going to ask about that because, I'm even aware that Fox News is played on TVs in the military. That's like
sure.
That's the television, and of course, how are young people going to escape being indoctrinated if that's what they're watching?
there was almost no Democrats that I was aware of in the Marines. Yeah, you're pretty much. In fact, I can remember the 1988 presidential election when we were all called out to formation by our company commander, and they were passing out the absentee ballots because we were all from other states, and he was basically told us to vote for George Bush, no, and we didn't question it. I don't think anybody, even questioned it. We're all young guys. We were just like, okay,
Yeah. Well, my parents told me that I had to vote Conservative when I was 18 as well because they did. So I understand this concept of hereditary voting, and whether it be in an institution like the military or whether it be in a household, I think it's pretty similar. And it often takes people to get into their early 20s to kind of realize, once they've had maybe a couple of general elections, to kind of realize that there are other ways. Trumpism changed that for you. Was there anything like the division before Trumpism in your world? This kind of absolute hatred from the right towards the left, seeing them and having derogatory names for them and hating anybody who wasn't white and cis and male, and all of this kind of the anti-Semitism and all of the stuff that we now are seeing on a daily basis. Did that exist in your days as a Republican?
The closest thing was 1992. I would say, the first Bill Clinton campaign, and maybe the first couple of years of the Clinton administration, because that was a shift towards the baby boomer generation, which was much more socially liberal. At that time, I was very socially conservative. I'm not now, but I was then. And I think that, the whole issue of character, it's kind of funny now, and I throw this back in the face of Republicans all the time, that back then their biggest objection to Bill Clinton was over character-related issues and whether he had affairs and things like that. These are the same people who love Donald Trump. So it's a little bit inconsistent. My position has been consistent. Theirs has not, as far as that stuff goes. I think that
hypocrisy. The hypocrisy is for me as an outsider is like the biggest thing, because even the kind of anti-abortion or pro-life as they call themselves, that movement. I mean, many of them have had to access abortion services themselves.
Sure.
The ones that talk about God and talk about the purity of their lives are the ones having affairs behind their partners' backs.
Right.
It goes on as much in Christian conservative, even in the church. And so this hypocrisy, it's almost like there's this huge lie, forget the big lie of the election. There is this huge conservative lie that they are living a very puritanical life that is completely the opposite. I mean, look at the former boss of Liberty University. I mean, he's a perfect example of somebody who got outed for having a kind of double life. I mean, were you aware of this hypocrisy growing up? Yeah,
I really saw that. It really came to a head during the end of Obama and beginning of the Trump campaign for me, because I was a Republican club president of a large Republican club in Florida during the Obama administration. And I saw the hostility towards him, not just for policy reasons, but as a man. And then I saw those same people embracing Trump. And at one point, I just kind of said to him, like, well, Barack Obama has lived his life in every respect the way we believe that somebody should live their life. He's a family man. He raised his kids. He hasn't cheated on his wife. There's no scandals. And yet you hate him viscerally. But Donald Trump has lived his life the opposite. He doesn't go to church. He can't quote a Bible verse. He's had three wives, cheated on all of them, 5 different kids, 25 mistresses, and yet you love him. And I said, I can't reconcile this in my head because I'm pretty consistent on these things, and you're not, so that.
But you were aware of the common denominator here. I mean, it was,
sure.
Barack Obama was the wrong shade of white for those people.
Yeah, and that's what brought it to a fore. Yeah.
Did anybody say that out loud? I mean, how close did you come to kind of witnessing outright racism as opposed to institutional racism?
This is something all of us Republicans have asked ourselves was it always there and we didn't see it? Were we willfully blind? Or is it that Trump brought it out more? It's sort of a combination, yeah. You would see that it's sort of bubbling up, but a lot of it was couched in the whole Muslim stuff, and maybe he wasn't born in the U.S., and talking about his dad or emphasizing his middle name, Hussein. It's always in that tone, never overt, like calling him an N-word, not like that. But you definitely saw it come to the surface during the Obama years. And that's when we all questioned, like, hey, was it always there and we were blind, or is this new? And I think it's sort of a combination.
Well, it was during those Obama years that the sales of firearms went up significantly. And I don't even want to think about why. But, that is so kind of entrenched in the kind of racist history of America. And I moved to America. I mean, please remember this. I chose it over the United Kingdom. I actually used to live near Winston Churchill's house. I would walk past the plaque on the wall, the blue plaque, and so I come from a place of good standing in that regard, and I still chose to move to the United States for all sorts of reasons. But now that I'm here and I've started to get to know people like yourself. How many more people, just before we get into the news of the week, I just want to ask you finally, how many more people are there like you?
Well, I think a number of them have already left. They've already left the party, or I think there are still a decent number, and they're very quiet. They don't talk much. They don't engage. They're repulsed by Trump and Trumpism and people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, but they don't really say it out loud. And I think that's really why my work on Twitter is so important, is because it's all geared towards them, really. It's geared towards that silent middle of the country that I want to show them the extremism of the Republican Party by showing people in their own words, speaking. And just putting it in front of people who have kind of tuned out of the news and say, is this really what you believe in? Is this really what you support? Because this is what the party has become.
You are a prolific tweeter, and I very much enjoy your reportage. But Twitter itself has changed in the last few weeks, unrecognizably, to the point that people like you are probably going to have to find another platform, because this character in Elon Musk, who years ago we'd heard that he'd donated to the Republican Party. That was like the closest we'd got to thinking that he was on the right, that there had been some donations, and that might have put you off buying a Tesla if you were so inclined. But he is not hiding his allegiance now. He is a clear operator for the far right. Yes. And he is giving license to some really quite scary characters. 3 so-called journalists who are exposing these Twitter files, currently talking about the suppression of right-wing opinion, and a whole thing to do with Hunter Biden's laptop, which of course will come to nothing. How do you feel about the platform that you have made your own, kind of losing its standing in this kind of democratic process?
It makes me really feel like the work that I do is more important on Twitter, because it's more of a Wild West situation now, where there are no guardrails. And I think that somebody who's pretty ruthless and pretty like myself, and someone who's not really shy about confronting the extremism of the right, it's not going to affect me that much, but it makes it more important, I think, for my work to point out the hypocrisy of these people and how terrible these people are. And I'm doing a lot more of that on Twitter since Musk took over. But what you said is right. He's not just engaging with Republican politicians. He's engaging with far-right kooky conspiracy theorists. Like, the worst people on Twitter are the people he's engaging with. And that's the most frightening thing. So it's not like he's engaging with Jim Jordan. He's engaging with outright racist, conspiracy theorist, QAnon type people, you know?
I mean, he's not the full ticket, is he? I mean, we're starting to realize this about Elon Musk. It's like, because some people say that he's doing it because, you know, Twitter usage and advertising is down, so he's trying to stoke the fire to create some more controversy so it becomes more of an interesting platform. I mean, I don't really see it like that. You know, I see this as him feeling like he's saving the world, and he genuinely believes that he's on a mission to unleash free speech, which you and I know is actually hate speech and is not going to end up very well.
Well, I see his definition of free speech on the other platforms, and it's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare, the things that you see. And yeah, it's just with no guardrails. See, I think he has this antiquated notion of what free speech is, you know, that everybody gets to speak freely. But I think he really doesn't fully appreciate what a weapon social media can become without any restrictions or restraints, and how it can be used to harm people. And I don't mean emotionally harm people. I mean physically, to get people killed, to get people assassinated, to organize riots, to organize rebellion. Back before 2020, I was monitoring Oath Keepers and Proud Boy groups saying all kinds of crazy stuff on Twitter. That was before they were all kicked off, and it was some frightening stuff. And so the idea that all of those people who are all coming back on Twitter now, you know, your Roger Stones, your Laura Loomers, your Mike Linda, and then what I've tried to do is, as they've come back on, I've tried to post the reasons why they were suspended. What they did originally that got them suspended, and people are just horrified, you know, when they see.
And a lot of it is crimes against the United States. I mean, these are people that claim to be patriots, and the enemy is the U.S., whether it be the Constitution or the Capitol building or, you know, the rules for the peaceful transfer of power. I mean, these people have committed treason, effectively.
And you can't ever get one of them to say anything bad about, let's say, Vladimir Putin. You know, you could search their Twitter accounts for years and you won't find a negative word about Vladimir Putin, but they do trash the United States pretty regularly. Yes. And they call themselves patriots and put flags in their bios.
I think about Elon Musk's childhood, and, you know, let's not forget that he might be an American citizen now, but he grew up a white person in South Africa.
Wealthy.
Yeah. And that is going to probably, in the same way that you experienced the indoctrination in the Marines, he would have experienced some indoctrination from, you know, right-wing white people living in effectively a black continent. I mean, that is going to, from the very early days of his childhood, that is probably going to rub off on him as an adult, is it not?
I mean, you look at his age, I think he's 46. So he was a teenager in the 80s, which was the height of apartheid. You know, he grew up in the 70s and 80s. So it wasn't like he, you know, caught the tail end of it. His formative years were under apartheid. He came to the U.S. for college. But, you know, and it wasn't I think his father owned an emerald mine, if I'm not mistaken. So it wasn't like, you know, his father owned a car dealership, you know. His father literally made his fortune off the apartheid system.
It's like the movie Blood Diamond, isn't it? It's all there.
Yeah. So
he went to Canada first, I think, before he came to the US. Like he briefly went
he did.
And then came and got his citizenship.
Right.
But you know, I just think about that because, you know, we are all the product of our upbringing. And no matter how level-headed we might be or keen to shake it off, you know, I just think it's important to consider people's exposure through life, nature and nurture. You know, it's a whole other conversation. Sure.
Yeah. That's why when he was, you know, when he lectures about the First Amendment, I tweeted one time, I envisioned, we're close to the same age. I'm a little bit older, but I envisioned myself in high school and what I thought about the South African regime in 1985 and thinking, well, he was a teenager in that regime. His father was part of that regime. And now here he is lecturing us on the First Amendment, on constitutional rights. And I'm like, I don't want to hear it from the son of an apartheid emerald miner about U.S. civil liberties. No offense.
He's the wrong person to buy Twitter, let's be honest. And I think that people like Jack Dorsey, probably for all the money that they've made out of this transaction, recognize that selling was probably very unhealthy for the bigger picture, for the safety of the world going forward, because it's not just the US. This will have ramifications right around the planet. I just want to talk about the news it happened on Friday, the announcement from Kyrsten Sinema that she's switching her allegiance. It could have been worse. I mean, she could have switched it to the Republicans, but she switched to independent, leaving the Democrats just days after it won the Senate race in Georgia to secure that 51st seat in the chamber. She said, "I have joined the growing number of Arizonans who reject party politics by declaring my independence from the broken partisan system in Washington. I registered as an Arizona independent," and this is her kind of claim that she would not caucus with the Republican Party, and Democrats could still maintain greater governing control in the closely divided chamber if she kind of maintains those relationships. And Chuck Schumer made a brief speech on Friday just praising her. I was like, isn't that tragic that, you have to coin an English phrase, brown nose somebody to kind of try and win their support and not upset them, knowing full well that they really are the worst person in your orbit at that moment?
Yeah, well, there's a lot there. First of all, I was very happy that the House Democratic leadership has decided to step aside and let younger members take over leadership roles. I was very unhappy that has not happened in the Senate. So Chuck Schumer is not my favorite senator for a variety of reasons. So that's that. I started talking about the Sinema thing a year ago on Twitter when her and Manchin started the antics. And what I said at the time was I viewed the two of them very differently, because Manchin is in a state that went plus 38 for Donald Trump. Donald Trump won West Virginia by more than I think any other state except Oklahoma. So the reality is Joe Manchin cannot win in West Virginia unless he takes some conservative stands here and there. And that's number one. And number two, Joe Manchin could switch and become a Republican tomorrow and easily win the Republican nomination for West Virginia. They would welcome him with open arms. Yeah. Kyrsten Sinema is not in that situation. Number one, her state is a blue state now. It is probably a 52-48, 51-49 state. And a big reason for that is a lot of Californians in the last few years have moved to Arizona, Democrats. And that's one reason. So number one is it's not where she has to do this. Number two, she can't, if she switched to Republican, as you suggested, she would be annihilated. She couldn't get 5% of the vote in a Republican primary in Arizona. If she did that, her career would be over. The Arizona Republican Party is not welcoming Kyrsten Sinema. So it's a very different situation than Manchin. And she also knows that she can't win a Democratic primary with the antics that she's pulled the last 2 years. I know she's done polling on this, and she knows this. So she put herself in this box where she's out of options. So her only option is, a lot of people have speculated, leave the Senate and go into TV or something, or do what she's now done. I guess her strategy now is to make this a three-way race, and somehow that would give her a shot to kind of get in with 40% of the vote or something. But I mean, this is all going to she has no options. If she runs as an independent, the only thing that will do is get a Republican elected, most likely.
She's famously a very lazy senator. I mean, I've heard she rarely shows up. She loves telling people that she's a senator, but she doesn't do a huge amount. She doesn't, do the work that she claims to do for her constituents. And you say that she could end up on television. I mean, she looks like she's stepped off of television. She has a made-for-TV face, a bit like Carrie Lake in that way. So, and this does happen in the US, doesn't it? This kind of, what shall I be? Shall I be a TV host or shall I be a politician? I mean, it's like, what?
She'd be great on The View. You know,
she'll be on The View. Of course she will.
Yeah.
You know, that's where it's going to end up. But what does this mean for voting in the Senate now? How does this change the majority that Democrats have, and how likely is she to prevent bills from being approved?
I don't think it's going to be a big problem for the next 2 years. I mean, I think clearly having that Senate seat that Warnock won was big to get the 51st seat. So I don't think her voting is going to change very much. I think she'll occasionally buck the party. I don't think that's why she did this. I think she did this because she's looking at her reelection in 2024 and knowing she's going to lose a Democratic primary. And so this is her. It has nothing to do with ideology. In fact, I think she was asked on Friday to explain some ideological reasons behind her move, and she didn't have any. You know,
well, she has no ideology. I mean,
she has none.
As far as I'm concerned, she is receiving whispers from Mitch McConnell, and he's basically, or whoever is the liaison, and she is doing Republicans' bidding based upon, you know, she gets all these backhanders. She's definitely in the pockets of big business. I mean, she was always an independent in terms of the way she voted because she had interests way above politics.
Right, exactly right. Yeah. I'm not really sure what her governing philosophy is. Doesn't seem she has one. Her governing philosophy is to get attention for herself.
There is a very clear ego there. I mean, just again, you know, if we think about like what makes a good politician, and this is where we go back to Barack Obama, you know, being a community organizer and understanding the law and kind of coming up through that kind of path. You know, what is the best path to being a really good, healthy politician to make the world a better place? And very few of them, certainly, I mean, we have a few in the UK, in the British Parliament, a handful, but still a lot of, you know, cinema types and old school backbenchers. But I really do think that there are some people like Kyrsten Sinema who are so completely unsuited for the job of senator or congressperson or politician, full stop. I don't even think they particularly enjoy it.
No, you're definitely right. It doesn't seem like they have a reason why they want to be there. This goes back to like, are there things that they want to do? Do they want to go to the Senate because they have things they want to do, or do they want to go to the Senate because they want to be a senator? You know, do you want to be somebody or do you want to do something? And I think that that's the case with her. She loves the concept of being a United States senator. She just isn't very much interested in the job.
And Marjorie Taylor Greene is the same. You know, she's like a disruptor in Congress, isn't she? You know, she's a very unnatural person for that job, especially when she like kicks someone in the street because they're in her way. I mean, it's like, you know, you shouldn't behave like somebody that one should look up to. But it suits this kind of period in her life and maybe the kudos associated with it as well as the salary. I mean, that's why in the UK they pay politicians so badly because no one wants to do it, you know, and so they pay them like $65,000 a year and that's all they get. How much would Kyrsten Sinema earn as a senator, just out of interest?
Senator, I think it's $180,000, somewhere right around there. Yeah.
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 Plus expenses.
Maybe 180, 190. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of fringe benefits.
Right, exactly. So it's worth doing, right? It's
sure.
better than driving the bus.
Sure.
Okay, let's look at some of the other news. Now, we haven't mentioned Donald Trump that much, which is weird because you know, he is your specialist subject. I want to talk about the Justice Department asking a judge to hold the Trump team in contempt over the Mar-a-Lago case. This is because obviously he said that all the documents that were found in his possession were handed over, and now 2 more have been found at a storage unit. Tell us about this and the brief history behind it and what this means for Donald Trump.
Well, we still don't have the original search warrant affidavit that hasn't been released to the public yet. There was a heavily redacted portion that came out, but there's been some reporting about the investigation. And here's what we know. What we know is that the Justice Department bent over backwards in the FBI and the National Archives to try and get these documents back. They know what they're missing. They have these inventoried, cataloged. They know what's missing, and they're not getting back.
That say top secret with nothing in them as well. I mean, there's always that, right?
Right. So they know when he's turning. It took forever. He made every excuse in the book, stalled them for months and months and months, agreed to deadlines, then asked for extensions, which is always Donald Trump's thing. Donald Trump's thing is when he knows he's caught doing something wrong, he delays, stalls, litigates some more, then delays some more, then stalls some more, and then hope people forget about him, and so that's what's happened here. And so it's really amazing that even after the raid, he's continued to hide things. And I know that people believe that there's still more that's missing. So I think we'll find out a lot of the details whenever the application for the search warrant gets unsealed completely. Then we'll find out the full extent of what they did. But, the Justice Department bent over backwards for this guy, more so than probably you would like and more than I would like. Yeah. And yet, he still didn't comply. But he's a victim.
He tried a delaying tactic by getting this special master involved, didn't he?
Right. That was another one.
That got overturned, but it still, took 2.5 months for that to kind of come and go. And then, of course, he had that judge who was a Trump appointed judge who was doing his bidding, and then it's now been said that she had no jurisdiction for any of this. I mean, this is just proof that he is a chancer. He is an operator. He doesn't really care how he does it, as long as he does it.
Yeah, and this was demonstrated throughout his life, throughout his business career, going all the way back to the 70s. It's always amazing to me when people are surprised by some of the tactics that he uses, because they've been out there in the public square for decades, and everyone can see it, whether it's stiffing contractors or litigating every failed business venture into the ground and all the bankruptcies. This is Donald Trump's MO. This is the way he operates. And then, of course, it's always to cry that he's the victim of persecution, when he ultimately loses.
Still the Republican voters are drawn to him despite all this evidence. Is there a link in some way to just the kind of psychology of this, that people that idolize him, who are former fiscal conservatives or business owners, who vote Republican, they see all of his misdemeanors as in an opportunistic way. And they're like, well, if he can get away with it, whether it be avoiding tax or evading tax, then so can I.
Yeah, there's part of it. I mean, there's different factions now in the Republican Party with respect to how they view and deal with Trump and Trumpism. So there's definitely, there are the higher level, the businessmen, the elected officials that have adopted that mentality that you've just talked about. But as far as like the psychology of the people who really love Trump, the hardcore, 30% MAGA base, I think the way they view him is that the more he gets attacked, the more they love him, because they view him as this anti-establishment figure, ludicrous, who's fighting the power and fighting the deep state and the globalists, and he's the only one that can stop him. And the reason why he's constantly being persecuted is because of that, because he's a threat to them.
Yeah. And he's always played the victim for decades. This videotape of him playing the victim years ago over things like planning permission or, just being a real estate mogul in New York.
Yeah. Everybody's always out to get him, right? For no reason, because they're jealous or whatever. Yeah. And it's part of the reason why they love him. And that base that I talk about, many of them were not Republicans prior to 2016. Many of them never voted before. They weren't even registered to vote. These are people who have literally come out of the woodwork and are now sort of controlling the Republican Party through their numbers and through their forcefulness. And we've seen that over and over again. I mean, one scene is a perfect example of when Lindsey Graham spoke out against Trump after January 6th, and then, he went to the airport. I think it was the 7th. After he voted to certify the election, he was chased through the airport by these rabid people that were at January 6th. And that caused Lindsey Graham to change, to do a 180, because he's afraid of them. The Republican politicians are afraid of their own voters.
Well,
physically,
this is what,
and in other ways.
This is what Joe Walsh was saying when I was asking him about, the feeling behind the scenes, because all of these politicians have admitted in previous interviews before Trump got the nomination that Trump was bad news, or before Trump won the presidency, certainly after he got the nomination, that he was bad news. Lindsey Graham said it. Kevin McCarthy said it. They've all kind
Marco Rubio.
They put their cards on the table, and it's all on tape. I mean, it's not like it disappeared into the ether. And just the gall of these people who know that their opinion was previously archived and is available, who are able to switch in such a way. You really have to be a certain kind of person to do that. And doesn't that go back to our conversation as to what makes a quality politician? It
does. It shows that they have no principles. They don't believe in anything. Or whatever they had, they're willing to sell out. Because every Republican had to make the calculus in 2018, 2020, and 2022 that if they were going to remain in office, they had to either support Donald Trump or at the very least not criticize him. Or they were going to be wiped out. They were going to be pushed out of office. And that happened with almost all of them. And so many of them have made the calculus that they're hanging on to their power is more important than their principles.
Let's go back to this investigation and to the Mar-a-Lago paperwork. And of course, there's the Trump Organization tax fraud case, which, he just lost on 17 counts of tax fraud. Trump has this ability to separate himself from the crime, doesn't he? He puts somebody in the middle, whether it be
buffers,
a lawyer.
They said in The Godfather.
Right, it's mafia behavior. It's skills that he's learned clearly in 1970s New York.
That's right.
What does that mean for? I'm sure there are hundreds of people watching this who are thinking, yeah, but when are they going to get him? When is he going to get prosecuted? How can a man walk around the United States of America and literally, everything he touches has a kind of criminal element to it, and yet he keeps getting away with it? I mean, will Jack Smith, as the special prosecutor, really kind of catch up with the man, or is it just will the executive office get prosecuted?
Yeah, Trump is always been good at it. Sort of like I said in The Godfather, that there's the famous scene where I think it's Pantangeline testifies before Congress, and he talks about all the buffers that the Godfather had between him and the people committing the crimes that he could blame it on. It's always like you just take the New York case. I mean, he blamed the whole thing on his accountant. The accountant. It's the accountant's
poor
fault.
Alan Weisselberg. Was not expecting
it was
that.
all him. He's the mastermind, right? I didn't know what he was doing,
But he took it. Weisselberg took it.
He did.
For a reduced sentence.
He did. He took the rap. Yeah.
And the problem is that these sycophants that work for Trump will do that, and there will be more at Mar-a-Lago and in the former Oval Office.
Donald Trump's superpower, Michael Cohen's talked about this, Mary Trump, is he's very good at identifying weaknesses in people and understanding how to exploit them. If there's one thing that he's a genius at, it's that. And he surrounds himself with people who have these weaknesses and vulnerabilities that he can exploit. And so they will stand up because they get so deeply embroiled into, it's the same thing with banks who have given him money. They get so deeply embroiled in his corruption that if they do anything about it, they go down as well and go down worse than him. But back to your original question, Jack Smith, I think that he will finally be indicted, in 2023, because I think now people have made the decision that they're not going to go to jail for him. There's enough people now that are cooperating and testifying, and the fact that it's grand jury testimony, so it's secret, so he doesn't. There's all these people going into the grand jury. He has no idea what they're saying, so it's not public. And I think that's what's happening behind closed doors is they're hanging him. I absolutely believe that. They are not going to go. Lindsey Graham is not going to go to jail for Donald Trump. So I think that in those secret proceedings and grand juries behind closed doors, he's getting roasted. We don't know it. We won't know it until the indictments come out. But I think that that's happening. And I think that's why I put on Twitter the other day, 2023 is going to be the year of accountability for MAGA. A lot of them are going to prison.
But it's also going to be the year of an awful lot of investigations in the House of Representatives.
That's the other side.
Because the Republicans are keen to paint a very different picture. They think the Democrats are corrupt. They think there's a witch hunt going on. They won't drop Hunter Biden's laptop. I mean, I kind of wish it was an iPad. I'm kind of sick of talking about that damn thing. If it was a Dell, I'll be very upset. But I really get a sense that do you think that if they're not going to carry water for him privately, do you think that will spill over, to use a kind of another nautical term, into the Republicans investigating? Do you think those investigations will go cold if stuff is happening in the courts? No,
I think that they're totally separate things. I think that the Republican leadership in the House has had this game plan that's what they were going to do over the next 2 years is a bunch of investigations. I think that because I've talked about that. They've said this repeatedly. I've posted them saying this on Twitter for months and months and months. I remember posting a lot of these James Comer interviews, who's going to be the chair of the Oversight Committee, so one of the most powerful people in the House. And people were all like, who the hell is James Comer? Why do we care about him? And I'm like, this guy is going to make the Democratic Party's life a living hell for the next 2 years. You better start paying attention to him. Yeah. Now, he's a buffoon, so that's the good thing. So I think when they came out and held their big press conference after the midterms and unveiled to the public what I've been posting on Twitter, all the investigations that they plan on doing, I think that they were shocked by the blowback that they got by people going, what? This is what you're going to do with your majority, is have 2 years of investigations and impeachment hearings on Fauci, on Mayorkas, on Biden, Hunter, you name it. This isn't what we wanted you there for. I thought you said you were going to do something about crime and gas prices and inflation. So yeah, I think that those things are going to happen because they don't know what else to do. They have no legislative agenda. Their agenda is to investigate the Biden administration.
And when you have people up front, the name you missed out, which is the one that I find most comical, is of course Jim Jordan.
Oh, sure.
With a G, with a GY. He is the most comical of all these characters, not least for the lack of a jacket. No disrespect to you with your choice of costume today. But I get the feeling that, these people are very compelling. They do make a very compelling argument. And you and I might be able to read into it and recognize that it's all just show business. But tragically, there is an increasing number of voters who are watching these things because Fox News and Newsmax and OAN are backing up these claims. And when you see Laura Ingraham say it and then Hannity says it and then Tucker Carlson said it, it kind of, it gives it weight. It is going to just continue this misinformation drive. And nobody benefits because America does not get better because of it.
No. Part of my job that I view this, and I've been gearing up for this for a while now, is to show the cartoon characterness of this stuff, of these people. And I'm ready for it. I mean, I know everything that's on the Hunter Biden laptop. I've seen it all. I've read it all. I've seen it all. I already know. So I'm prepared for, I know what they're going to do with Mayorkas. I know what they're going to do with Fauci. because I've paid attention and I've listened to what they have to say. And most of it's on these podcasts that they go on. It's not on Fox News.
That's interesting, isn't it? They spill the beans in a right-wing setting, then they don't realize that everybody has access to these podcasts. They think it's a safe space when they're talking to Steve Bannon's War Room or whatever, right?
Yeah, see, there's always been people on Twitter that cover the right wing who are progressives, but they do it by covering Fox and Newsmax. And what I figured out a couple of years ago is what you just said, which is when they say the most extreme stuff is when they think they're in a safe place. I posted some clips yesterday of Eric Trump, where he went on a pretty obscure podcast of some really crazy religious people. One claims to be a prophet, that gets emails from God every week. And he went on her show. And he said some wild stuff. So yes, that's when you get them, when they let their guard down, when they know that only a few hundred people are listening to this right-wing podcast, but I happen to be one of them. And so, yeah, and that's what I intend to do with these guys on these investigative committees, is I intend to show them at the height of clowndom. And what I really think is that they're going to overplay their hand. They're going to do this in an obnoxious way. And it's going to turn the American people off big time. There's a way that they could do these investigations in a measured, rational, sane way, but they're more into the performance. They're more into the theater, and they're going to overplay their hands because these aren't popular people. These aren't interesting people. They're just obnoxious jerks.
And they're not smart either. I mean,
they're not smart.
The other thing is that, it's very easy to say a lot and shout very loudly. This is what Jim Jordan does as well. Who's the other guy who's the orthodontist? Rand Paul.
Yeah.
I mean, calls himself a doctor. He these people make an awful lot of noise, and they carry themselves in a way that they are very authoritarian. But nothing they have to offer holds water. And I just want to go back, just to rewind a little bit to what you were saying about them exposing stuff online.
Yeah.
January 6th was fully exposed a week before it happened.
Absolutely.
It was very clear to anybody watching that Steve Bannon said it's all going to go off on January 6th. There was multiple people in multiple places because this, as we now know, was all planned with the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys and Roger Stone and in the White House. It was the chief of staff was, the linchpin of a lot of this. His cell phone is going to be the ultimate evidence as all of this kind of comes to a head. It didn't work then. The FBI weren't ready. The police at the Capitol weren't ready. Nobody was ready for what was advertised in these right-wing circles as was going to happen. So what suggests to you that people will be ready for the next thing?
Well, I think people's eyes have been opened. I do. I really think that, because I can tell you that I was posting every day in December what they were going to do, because I was on Parler, I was on Gab, I was on all these right-wing sites I joined online all these different Proud Boys groups, Oath Keepers groups, all the individual groups that ended up going to the Capitol. I was following all of them on different platforms. So I knew exactly. I posted them saying that they were going to have body armor, that they were going to have improvised weapons, that they were going to wear disguises. I was posting that stuff. And you know what happened? What I got was, number one, I had very few followers then. And number two, the few that I had all told me I was crazy. These people are just talking. They always talk a big game, but they never follow through. It's not going to happen. You're being an alarmist. You're trying to get clicks or likes, which I honestly could care less about my Twitter engagement. I don't get a penny for it. So why would I care? So they're just, that was the attitude. That's not the attitude anymore. Because I think after January 6th is when my Twitter account really exploded. And I started getting a lot more attention because it's like, well, how did he know? And what you say is, it's obvious now. A lot of that is hindsight. There weren't very many people, I can tell you, on Twitter or in the news predicting violence on January 6th. There was a small cadre of us, but there weren't many. However, there are hundreds of thousands of people now who say, oh, yes, we all knew that it was bad things were going to happen. No, they really didn't. Most of the people who say that expected a raucous rally, but they did not expect the Capitol to be stormed. They had no clue.
But why didn't the security services and the intelligence services, do more? And I'm going to answer my own question here, and I'm sure you know where this is headed. In the same way that there was controversy as to why Nancy Pelosi didn't call the National Guard, well, we've since seen that she did, and she did it whilst eating a beef jerky, which is like doubly impressive. But there must have been some inside communication that prevented the security services from looking into this, that prevented the National Guard. And we're starting to hear about that now. And obviously the January 6th committee has looked into this. But this, for me, is the bigger story, isn't it? That who was complicit and at what levels up the chain of command was there. And this goes right back to you being a Marine and being surrounded by right-leaning or right-wing or far-right or conservatives or Republicans or whatever you choose to call it, but this kind of inbuilt thing that a lot of people who work either in the military or in the security services are on the right. And maybe, even subconsciously, they supported this whole insurrection.
Well, I mean, the executive branch of the government at the time was in the hands of the person who organized it.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, the people who are in place to deal with that, which would be, some of the military personnel, Chris Miller, who is the acting. Look, all of the people who were in place that were adults either were fired or left right before January 6th. That was not a coincidence. Bill Barr resigning on December 21st to spend more time with his family with less than a month to go. I absolutely believe he knew that it was going to be really, really ugly on January 6th. And he didn't want to be the attorney general when all of that went down. And what else did Trump do? At the same time Barr left, he fired his Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, and replaced him with acting Secretary Chris Miller, who is the person in the center of all this.
He's the most complicit of the military operators.
Yes. And he's the one who, there's this time gap that he's never answered openly, publicly answered for, which is why was there this 2 or 3 hour time gap when Pelosi was and everybody was demanding that they send some help and no help was requested. And so, I mean, there's some speculation that Michael Flynn's brother was involved, Charles Flynn, in making some phone calls to prevent help. I don't know if any of that's true. But I think what we're going to find out is at the highest levels of the executive branch in key spots, Trump had put people in there who were going to obstruct any response.
Yeah. Because there was no reason, once he fired all of these senior people, to bring in new people at the end of an administration when he literally had 2 or 3 weeks left until Inauguration Day. There was no reason to kind of change it all up other than to find people who would do his bidding or were complicit or who were loyal Trumpists.
One of the things that I've talked about, and I did interview with the January 6th committee like a year ago, and I brought this up, and this has kind of flown under the radar. No press has really paid attention to this, but he replaced the USAID director as well. And what USAID does is run elections in foreign countries that are unstable, that where democracy is a threat, and we will go in and help administer their elections through USAID agencies. So I believe that the plan was, if January 6th worked, was to, and the guy he put in charge of USAID, I think was a personal injury lawyer. Okay, that he put in charge of this agency, one of his cronies. And I believe that the plan was, I mean, they wanted to rerun elections under martial law in
That's right.
in a handful of states, and I believe that they were going to use USAID to do that. They were not going to use local election people. They were going to send in this federal agency that they send into foreign countries, third world countries, and have them run the election. And the guy who was in charge of it was a personal injury lawyer friend of Donald Trump. I believe that was the plan. Now, we never got to that stage, but I think that was the plan. So there's all these people that were put in place in these key positions that were nut jobs, unqualified at the last minute, without any congressional oversight or, they were all in acting positions. The director of national intelligence, Radcliffe, was acting, was new.
Well, Trump found out that it was perfectly legal to have somebody acting, and the reason that he liked that is because it didn't need to get congressional approval.
Right.
So he was in a
Kash
position
Patel.
to choose people who were unsuitable because they were never going to need to get approved.
Kash Patel, acting chief of staff to the Secretary of Defense, who had been Devin Nunes' hatchet man on Benghazi. So, I mean, all of these people were put in there in 2020 for shenanigans. So,
how many of these people do you think, with all of the evidence now that is available, as well as the communications, because of course cell phones play a big part of the evidence, how many of these people do you think are going to end up either, in a state penitentiary or wearing an electronic tag? I mean, it reminds me a little bit of Trump's campaign team in 2016 who ended up all getting arrested, from Paul Manafort down.
Yeah.
That, it's just surrounding himself with criminals.
Yeah.
How many of this lot do you think are actually going to face the music?
Good question. So it depends on how aggressive Jack Smith wants to get. If he's going to only get the obvious people, the main people where the evidence is overwhelming, it's probably about 6 people. I think it's Trump. It's Chris Miller could be in there, possibly. Mark Meadows, definitely. Definitely John Eastman, who was the one pushing all the legal memos as far as the legal theory. Yeah. Jeffrey Clark, who is the person that he was trying to install as the acting Attorney General. Yeah. I just laugh even thinking about him being an Attorney General because he's such a clown. But I mean, those are the people. And Scott Perry, I think, who is the guy in the House of Representatives who was their point man for all of this. So I think at a minimum, it's like those 6 people. Now, if he really wants to get aggressive and go down further into the food chain and rope in your Kash Patels and your people like that, I don't know that he's going to do that. My guess is that he'll probably want to get those people to cooperate and offer them immunity deals,
It's so interesting. I was trying to think of a word to describe this kind of cache of criminals. And the word is swamp. And it's ironic that he kind of ran on this plan to drain the swamp. And yet he really brought in the swampiest creatures to facilitate the overturning of a United States general election. I mean, you couldn't make this up. And if I wrote a synopsis for a film script and handed it to you in 2015, you'd have gone, nah, this is too outrageous. No one will come and see this.
There's so many people who have on their resume these really prestigious titles that they were able to acquire, and they use those titles now to get book deal. They're on speed. You're constantly like, take a guy like Kash Patel, we just said, he repeats like a mantra, like over and over again, that he was acting chief of staff to the Secretary of Defense. I mean, for the rest of his life, he's got that on his resume. I was the former this. And there's so many of these people that are out there that are cashing in on these jobs and these titles that they never would have been able. They rose so far high above their station and what they were qualified for and put in those positions simply because Donald Trump wanted people like that around him. I mean, even look at his press secretaries like Spicer and people like that. Yeah. They had no business, Scaramucci. They had no business ever being in those positions,
Well, just the first day of Spicer going, that was the largest inauguration crowd, period, was the moment when most of us literally fell off our chairs. And we were like, okay, this is the way this administration is going to go. And it did. It did not disappoint. The tragic side of it is that there was manslaughter. There was negligence that caused manslaughter, which will never get prosecuted. I'm talking about over 100,000 deaths in COVID, which it's reports now have said that people's lives could have been saved if they took it more seriously and acted earlier. And it was unfortunate that it was an election year, the same year as a worldwide pandemic, because Trump obviously picked the wrong thing to focus on. But also this, I mean, even, the shooting down of an Ukrainian aircraft. I mean, like, all of these things, were knock-on effects to Trump's behavior that was entirely negligent. The type of things that he should be doing as the commander-in-chief, siding with Putin rather than the security services over election interference. I mean, it's a very tragic legacy for the U.S.
Yeah, long-lasting damage. I mean, as much as... and I think the unfortunate thing... Well, I'll say this. I felt like the first 2 years of the Biden administration was so much cleaning up messes, putting out fires. You feel bad for him because he never really had a real inauguration or an ability to celebrate or anything. He jumped right into January 6th, Republicans refusing to even attend his inauguration and then saying he was an illegitimate president. And of course, we're in the worst height of COVID when he takes office. So he's got to impose all these mandates, which people then went crazy over. So the guy has never had a chance to sort of, and I think that now in the next 2 years he will. Even with the House doing all of their investigations and obstructing, I think at least things are going to calm down a little bit for the administration. I really do. And I think most of the focus is going to be on craziness in the House, the Trump prosecutions, and Biden can just kind of rise above all of that nonsense now that his legislative agenda has largely been passed.
And to be seen as an elder statesman.
Yeah.
When the other team are just like kids messing around.
Exactly.
in the yard. Okay, Ron, I'm so thrilled that we've had the opportunity to have this conversation. I'm a big fan of yours on Twitter. I know you will outlive Twitter, and so I look forward to finding you wherever you make your new home. But thanks again for being on the Weekend Show.
Thank you so much.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to join me next week, and we'll do it all over again. You can watch this show again if you missed it. Just rewind and start over. You can also download my daily podcast, 5 Minute News. It drops every morning, so you can listen while you make your coffee. And next week, it's a brand new special guest. It's 3 more factual news stories to discuss, only on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with MeidasTouch.